Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about one of the new transfigured skill gems that I'm quite interested in. It might be really good, it might be really bad, it will depend. I'll explain why I'm kind of interested in this, but the gem is Poison's Concoction of Bouncing. So in case you guys aren't aware, just in case you don't know where this is even coming from, on the bottom of the Necropolis page, pathofexile.com/Necropolis, there is always a press kit, sort of, where you have different pictures that you can use, for example, for thumbnails or for just whoever, right? And in there were actually some extra skill gems that they haven't revealed on the website itself. Now, if we talk Poison's Concoction itself, right, the original gem, this was something I played back in 3.16. It was my league starter back then, and it was a really, really fun one. It falls off around about end of red maps, but back then it was actually quite legit. It definitely needed a little bit of extra damage in end game, but overall the early game was just completely carried. But after that, what happened was absolute disaster. In 3.21, they redid the gem, and I don't really know what they were thinking. So the skill was basically insane early, pretty bad end game, and what they did is they made it worse early, but still good early, still really good. It's still a really good leveling skill, one of the better ones, but a little bit worse. And then in endgame, they made it even worse. So I have no idea what they were thinking, but they basically made it so that whenever you actually press Poison's Concoction and you shoot, before you only had to pay 2 life loss charges, and now you have to pay 1 per projectile. And in case you guys don't know, Poison's Concoction gets extra damage from consuming life loss charges. So back then that was kind of a shtick, and you would scale a lot of additional projectiles for more poison overlap, right? These shotgun actually, right? But what happened is they nerfed it, and now instead of in your GG setup, which would have greater volley and GMP, instead of only needing to consume 2 life loss charges, you have 9 projectiles, so you need to do 9. And that is impossible to sustain, especially since the skill itself has a 115 base attack speed multiplier, making it not exactly viable for that kind of playstyle. So yeah, the skill just kind of fell out of favor, and here we are, instead of them rebalancing the main skill gem, which is what they should be doing, and they are just not with most of these skill gems. They just try to put a band-aid on, and they have a new transfigure gem, and this one is actually quite legit, I think, but we'll have to go a little bit more into that. Now, the reason why I'm really hyped about this one, and we're going to lay out all the differences to the main skill gem, is also what I saw in the trailer, but let's go over it. So let's look at the differences we can spot. First up, it does not have 15% more attack speed, which you can't really sustain the life flask anyway. It's fine. It makes it a little bit worse early for sure, but it's not the biggest loss, not as big of a loss as it would be on other skills. Still a thing, right? The base damage, this is a level 1 skill gem. That is the one we get. I know there's levels 20 gems on the website, but this one is from the press kit, so it's only level 1 for some reason. And the damage is exactly the same as normal Poison's Concoction. I've seen it, so I can assume that the scaling is also going to be the same. But that's not the most important part. Now, the next one is important. Modifiers to number of projectiles instead apply to the number of times the skill chains. And that is actually very similar to a gem we already know, which is Rolling Magma. Rolling Magma basically has the same functionality. So if you look right here, this is how your Poison's Concoction would look like as well. And if you scale additional projectiles, that would mean that it would just chain further. However, the most important line is buried down here. Projectiles chain in random directions. Now, why is that such a big deal? I will show you with Nemesis, which basically has the same thing right here. So if this skill is very similar to Rolling Magma, which we'll look at the clip in a second, Rolling Magma without Nemesis is a lot worse than with Nemesis. If you've ever tried cast on crit Rolling Magma, especially back in Crucible, when we had that crazy AoE multiplier, you know what I'm talking about. But it's pretty easy to understand why. If you see Rolling Magma just go into one direction and just chain off the screen, it's not going to overlap multiple times. However, every direction that isn't away from the target is an upgrade in terms of overlap. So if I hit this, for example, now just jump back and hit 2 additional times. This is why Nemesis on these kind of builds is incredibly valuable. But the problem is, especially now with the Uber reworks, I mean, it's going to be absolutely impossible to league start with this. And I want to make this clear. This has nothing to do with returning projectiles support or whatever. This is only about the random direction. This is why it's so good on these kind of skills. You get way, way more overlaps. But we actually get to see this skill in the trailer, so let's look at that real quick. So right here we can see this is the orb, and I don't really know what's exactly on this. You can see the support gems, they're pretty straightforward. I don't know if this is slower proj, I don't know if this is faster proj, I don't know if he has AoE, although I don't think he has any because it says 1.8 radius, and this looks round about like 1.8. But if we see this right here, you can see it chaining around quite a bit. And there's a lot of upsides to this one huge hit instead of having these small poisons. We're going to go over that later. But the one thing that interested me is the behavior against bosses. Now, I want to make this clear. I obviously understand that GG cherry picks these clips. I totally get that. But I don't really understand why they would stand there for an hour to make the skill look good, because that's kind of by the by, and there's no real reason to like fake it or anything like that. But just in order to see what's going on here at the boss, I want to quickly put the playback speed to 0.5. So I want you to look at the amount of overlaps that this poisonous concoction is getting. I don't think he has any additional change, which are really easy to get. I think he's only like 2 or 3 or whatever. But look at this. So he casts it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So he probably has like 9 chains. I did see him throw one, so I think those were actually 2 separate attacks with round about, let's say, 3 or 4 chains. They hit like 4 or 5 times each, and you can add those chains pretty damn easily. It's pretty easy to get those extra chains because every extra projectile is also an extra chain. What I'm trying to understand here is, why the hell does this target so cleanly and doesn't go completely off the screen? And if we go further, there are actually going to be 1 or 2 that are going off the screen. Right now, you're having these crazy, or I don't know what is happening. The only thing I can think of right here is that when there is an enemy nearby, it actually soft targets toward it, but I don't think that would make any sense, because why would it say random then? That's usually not how GG does these kind of things. But if you look at it, the only time where the projectile actually goes away from the enemy is exactly where it phases. So there is no enemy anymore. You can see this from the curses up top. So right here, this guy has Azenov on. We see that on in the other clip, he has Azenov on. So he always has temporal chains. It's not like the curse ever runs out. So right here, right, you see all these overlaps over and over and over. If that was random, that would be like, I don't know, 0.1% chance or something for that actually to happen. Okay, and now you're gonna see the curse disappear right here, and that's when it goes off the screen. That's when it starts going towards the sides. And see, this is where I'm kind of confused if this is actually random. Another explanation, though, could be that it's just because the side of the area actually doesn't let the poisonous concoction go anywhere, so it can only go back. Maybe that's the case, and it's just a really good boss or in certain type of arenas. But either way, if we look at the next boss, this actually defeats my theory a little bit, because here it does sometimes chain out a little bit. So if you can see right here, he starts throwing them, and they do go a little bit out. 1 or 2 are not hitting, obviously. If all of them were hitting, this skill would be completely ridiculous. That's all fine. Now we can see one that goes a little bit outwards. So now we have a little bit more random, right? This is what I would call random. So I'm not really sure what happened here. It might really be just the arena, because here we see 1 or 2 stragglers going out, and that is intended behavior. But by the by, whatever, I'm just saying this looks a little bit fishy to me. Maybe there's some way to actually interact with it, or they exactly cherry-picked that one scenario, or it's because the arena was a little bit tighter. Those are all possible explanations. But let's go back to the skill gem. Why is it so hyped? So it bounces basically like rolling magma. Now, beyond that, the skill has crazy flat damage built in. So if we look at the normal poisonous concoction gem right here, at level 1, you will see it has 3% of your life flask recovery of the flasks that you consume as extra added flat chaos damage. That is not that much, but it does scale with level all the way up to level 20, where I think it's around about, yeah, it's 11%. This skill starts out at 30%. I want to remind you, this is level 1, and it starts out at 30%. Now, it does consume 6 charges, which is quite rough. That's like a 6 projectile poisonous concoction. But if we look at how much more damage it deals, it's more than worth it. Even if you just overlap 2 times, we're talking about more damage already. But we haven't even talked about chain scaling and stuff like that. But before that, just real quickly, in case you guys don't know, Poisonous Concoction scales with Life Flask recovery. Basically, it takes whatever is on the Life Flask, the recovers so-and-so. The duration doesn't matter. You just want a Divine Life Flask with 70% amount recovered, and then the biggest amount of quality you can get. Now, this league, you can actually corrupt your flasks, so you can technically go to 40, but for a league start, it's more realistic to have a maximum of 30. But if we just take this level 1 gem, right, we can say 5304 times 0.3. You're getting, for a level 1 gem, 1,590 flat added chaos damage. Now, obviously, you're not going to have this kind of life flask at level 12 when you get the gem. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to say how ridiculous it is. And if it scales the same way as the normal poison conch, it goes from 3 to 11, it would go from 30 to 105. That's not going to happen, obviously. But even if it just goes to like 40 or 50, we have a very interesting skill gem here. Now, another thing I want to point out here, why I'm pretty goddamn interested in this skill gem, is because of the interaction with Fury Valve. So we already saw that the amount of projectiles doesn't scale any overlaps, it just scales the amount of chains. It chains around, kind of like with Rolling Magma. So right now you have chains plus 2 times. So it bumps and then it bumps again and it stops. But the more chains you have, the more that goes up. Now, usually, Poisonous Concoction builds have to add additional projectiles like GMP and stuff like that, and that takes away support gem. Or better said, greater volley, so you actually have better overlaps, right? You know the drill. But this is better because you can actually use Fury Valve. Now, Fury Valve is a very underrated and extremely niche amulet that has some inbuilt stuff. On the bottom here, it says modifiers to number of projectiles instead applied to the number of targeted projectiles split towards. Doesn't matter, the skill cannot split, but what stays is the +2 projectile, high LE res, evasion, and projectile speed. Now, the projectile speed might end up actually working against you, but you can always take reduced projectile speed and also less projectile speed if you really need to. However, straight up scaling +2 projectiles from an amulet without having to use GMP is a pretty big deal. Now, it's not that big of a deal because for GMP or greater volley, you don't get the less multiplier because we're probably playing poison, sure, but just having this amulet in our arsenal is absolutely insane. And the second reason is way better poison prolif. In case you guys don't know, the poison proliferation from Master Toxicist on Pathfinder can only prolif the highest poison from a single target. So when you see prolif being really effective, it's usually in big groups. Because sure, only one poison prolifs, but from each mob and poison stacks. So a mob in the middle will get all those poison stacks together. However, Poison Conch has pretty tiny hits because it scales additional projectiles, and it's more about hitting a lot of times. That's usually what poison is a lot of the times about. But this skill has way more base damage, as we figured out. It's going to hit less than the original one, but does like 3, 4, 5 times the damage. Now, another thing I'm pretty hyped about is actually the better clear speed potentially, because you're just gonna have these Poisonous Concoction rolling magmas rolling around everywhere randomly, right? Which you don't really have to aim all that much, which is going to alleviate that, which is quite annoying on Poisonous Concoction. There's like this delay, and then if the enemy runs in front of you, it's super, super annoying because it screws up your overlaps. Not really with the skill gem. So obviously in these trailers, we don't know what they have, right? They usually have no quality of life, not that much AoE, not that I see anyways. So you can make this way better, but I actually feel like this could be a decent clear speed. And in general, Poisonous Concoction, if it was stronger, would be a good contention for League Starter because you're unarmed. Your gem scales your damage. You don't need to upgrade your weapons constantly. However, that is a downside in endgame because in endgame you have good weapons and now you can't use them. So it's kind of a give and take. However, if this new gem can actually kind of combine both of those worlds and make it good for endgame as well, that would be ridiculous. With that said though, this is just something I wanted to throw out. I want to do more of these like sporadic videos about stuff that I'm thinking about now, so I thought maybe it would be interesting for some people. In general, I don't know if I'm gonna make ever a League Starter about this, at least not this league, because I don't want to risk it. I don't want to bait anybody, right? But if there's more information coming out and if we see something more, for example, once we see the level 20 gem, if it looks amazing, I might just jump the gun and do something weird. But otherwise, just wanted to share my thoughts and my ideas with you guys. And yeah, with that being said, because I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.